Hello, everyone. I'm going to get going here with our webinar about Microsoft Teams. So first of all, to introduce myself, my name is Graham Ford, and I am the Director of Technology Consulting and Services at 501 Commons. 501 Commons is a capacity building organization that provides services to other nonprofits to amplify their impact and their ability to achieve their goals. We believe that that everyone thrives when all nonprofits thrive. So 501 Commons has long used Office 365, and over the last year, we have been exploring and rolling out Teams in a variety of ways for our own uses. We see it as a very powerful and capable tool that many nonprofits that are on Office 365 could take advantage of in a variety of ways. And so while I might not have all of your answers during this webinar, I'm hoping that I can help you explore how Teams might aid your organization in achieving your goals. Please feel free to answer questions. Let's see. So we're going to first talk about Teams Teams and what Teams is, and then we're going to move on and talk through some of the various functionality and functional components of Teams. At that point, I'm going to pause for some Q&A time so that we can answer some of your questions before moving on. I'll then move into a demo, so you'll get to see Teams in practice and working. And finally, with a little bit more Q&A at that point. And then I'll talk about the design of Teams and how you might, some design around implementation of Teams, because there are questions and decisions that every organization should consider as it starts using it. I'll also cover some other Teams information. And finally, again, more Q&A. I want to make sure that this works, that everyone is able to get the information they're looking for. Now, looking at your poll, and thank you to everyone who completed it, it looks like a number of you are currently using Teams and then some other tools like Chatter, Yammer, SMS, etc. Also, in terms of topics, the winners seem to be better internal group collaboration, organizing digital solution tools, improving collaboration among geographically distributed people, and consolidating many tools in the streamline and simplify. These are all really powerful ways in which Teams can aid organizations in their work. So I'm going to talk a little bit, move in here and talk about what Teams is. First of all, Teams is, from a technology standpoint and Microsoft technology roadmap standpoint, the replacement for Skype for Business. So previous Skype for Business and then before that Link were all essentially chat, video, and communications tools as part of the Office 365 platform and previous on-premise systems. Microsoft is essentially sunsetting like Skype for Business and will be replacing it with Teams. And as of, I think, earlier this year, Microsoft deemed that Teams was equivalent in terms of functionality with Skype for Business. So anyone using Skype for Business should be able to move over and use Teams and get the same and more functionality as they had in the previous system. Teams is also essentially a unified interface, user interface for Office 365. That's one of the interesting things about it, is it is not just a software piece that allows chat and video calls, but it brings together many of the different pieces of Office 365 into play so that you can use it with groups to collaborate in a variety of different ways. It also is integrated with non-Microsoft online services. So you can embed content in Teams, frankly, whether or not it is even a part of Office 365 or the other vendor supports Office 365. But you can bring together the variety of tools and systems in one place. to allow for better collaboration. Also just clear information, clarity on what tools a project or team is using, so that you present a single sort of pane of glass, if you will, for what's available in the system. So that's Teams. And you know, the other thing about Teams, and this is something that I like to emphasize, is that Teams is an organizational tool. The content, everything inside of it is owned by and managed by the organization that owns the system. This has significant advantages over other tools like, I don't know, SMS and iMessage and others, like, or Skype, which is a consumer oriented system. Those consumer systems, or systems that even worse, have accounts that are owned by individuals, are dangerous for organizations, because it means that content is living in silos that are outside the purview and management scope of the organization. By using Teams and bringing collaboration and communications into the fold, this allows the organization to own the content, to manage the content, to deal with personnel transitions, to standardize processes across the organization, and also to deal with a variety of, you know, I would say boring or administrative procedures, for example, for litigation holds and other and issues that, you know, unfortunately come up around, you know, legal and HR, et cetera. So Teams allows you to bring in communications to the fold that so the organization can own and manage those. The other benefit, frankly, to using a system that is organized around your business is that it can be turned off. If you have staff that's using personal tools like text message, it's hard to turn those off. It's hard to set your away when you go on vacation. So by having that, and we all, you know, myself included, like to be able to disconnect and go on vacation. And so allowing to have, you know, you can, if you have the Teams app on your phone, for example, and you go on vacation, you can just delete the app and you are disconnected. Whereas if you're using individual tools, it's really hard to separate yourself from work in a different way. So there's various reasons that it's both advantageous for the user, like the person and staff member, and for the organization to use tools like this. I'm going to end pulling our introductory poll here. Thank you very much again for your responses. So Teams features. Teams has chat, presence, screen sharing, video, one-on-one ad hoc groups and meetings, file access, web content and applications, and phone system. So I'm going to just go through these. Some of them may be pretty basic. Some of them, many of you are probably using them, but we're going to just talk about what they are. So the clients for Teams there are full clients like applications on Windows and Mac and iPhone and Android. Those 4 clients are essentially generally have parity in terms of features and can do pretty much everything. There might be some limitations in like sharing your screen on iPhone, for example, but generally you can do everything on those meetings, in those applications, including on the Mac. Web browsers can do most features, but there are limitations in terms of what you can do in some of the browsers. And Microsoft, as I understand it, is developing and further enhance the features available built in the web browsers, such as Chrome, so that users can do screen sharing and video and all the other functionality within the web browser. And you'll see a little bit of that later on in the demo. Okay, so now just to talk about the architecture of Teams. And this is important to understand because it has a variety of impacts. Teams, in very many ways, is an interface to Office 365. it itself has its sort of intrinsic functionality, is the chat, is the video, is the threaded conversations. But beyond that, what Teams is doing is leveraging other functionality across other software applications, including Office 365. And that's relevant in a couple ways. It means that if you're already using some of these applications in Office 365, you can tie them into Teams, or actually create teams that are based upon the existing structure that you have. In particular, in Office 365, there is something called an Office 365 group, or modern group, as it's called. If you go into SharePoint in Office 365 and create the site right now, you are by default, the default settings are to create an Office 365 group. Now, and that includes whenever you create a team in Microsoft Teams, and forgive me, Mike, there's a little bit of repetition here because with the application being called Microsoft Teams, we also have the term team within the application itself. So I have to, it can be a little difficult to follow sometimes. I'll try to slow down. So Office 365 has this, whenever you create a team within Teams, it is also creating a parallel Office 365 group. That is a requirement. There's generally no way to turn that off. And so when you are, say, storing files in Teams, it is storing those files in the SharePoint group that is created, or the Office 365 group, because that Office 365 group has a SharePoint site where those files are stored. That group has other resources, such as an Outlook mailbox, planner tools, task lists, streams. Those are streams directory, Power BI containers. Those are all created when you create the team. And I'll show you a little bit of this later in the demo. The relevance of that is that if you create a group in Teams, create a team in Teams, if you're looking at other parts of Office 365, you're going to see the group related to that. For example, if you have a team called Department of Mysteries, you will find a group called Department of Mysteries, and it'll have all of these other pieces related to that. And so it's important to know this because it can be confusing about why you have a team and why you have a group and they're named the same thing. In fact, also the membership, so who is allowed to access these tools, is shared and actually synchronized between the team and the group. So owners of the team are owners of the group, and owners of the group are owners of the team, etc. So that is an important thing to understand as you're supporting users and people on your team and they're exploring Office 365 about that and what that is. So that's, So that's a little bit about the architecture. Now, the first feature that most people by default get into is the chat functionality. And this is the most simple piece where it's just, you can chat back and forth, you can jump into video calls and phone calls and screen share right within the chat. And that's just the most basic thing that a lot of people are using. It's a good place to start if you're using Skype for Business. You can launch Teams and start chatting right there. And that gives you the most basic functionality without any configuration. Now, Teams and channels are where we start to getting the collaborative components of Teams. So that means, and a team is, and so you have the team, and within the team is channels. Channels are just simply an organizational tool around for the team. You might have channels for ongoing processes, like, let's see, what was the team doing? Like for meetings, or you might have a channel for fun conversations, tips, various things about, like, say, client services, or others. You might have a channel for scheduling. So there's various reasons. Use the channels as a way to organize within your team the content. I'm going to take a stop here, and I'm going to launch another poll here, a temperature check. If you can please respond. I just hope you can give me some feedback as I'm going here to about where things stand. Okay, so let's see. So teams are sort of the basic group collaboration, and then within that is channels, which are an way to organize your team. Let's see. Now, next. Within the teams in the channels, you see different tabs. The tabs are the way content is organized. So you have conversations, you can have files. You can have different tabs for different things, and we'll talk about that later. Tabs are often how other content is pulled into the team. Okay, so I'm going to see if there's any questions here. Well, no questions yet. Please ask them. I'm going to give you a moment, but otherwise, and then I'll move on. Okay, and looking at this, they've got, oh yeah, looking for difference between this and Skype. So, yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about channels and design later on. As for the difference between Teams and Skype, so Skype actually comes in essentially two flavors. There was Skype for Business, which is the business branded version of Skype. This Teams is the replacement. Now, Skype Consumer, that's what most people think of when they talk about Skype. It is a consumer-oriented product that is focused on video and sound and sharing and conversation. It also has some phone calling functionality in Skype, but ultimately Skype itself is a consumer product oriented towards individual users. Businesses don't generally have access to Skype accounts that someone might set up, and you also don't have various controls and tools around Skype. That is the essential difference. Skype doesn't have a lot of the collaboration functionality there that Teams might have. As far as moving on here. So the difference between groups and teams is that for every team, there's also a group that pairs with it. So I'll go back to the so a team gets created. A team is where sort of the chat and conversation sit and the interface for getting to content. Every team also has a group that is associated with it. And the group has all of the Office 365, other 365 content, such as the SharePoint site, Planner, etc. And I'll show you a little bit of this later in the demonstration. Chats are saved automatically and synchronized across devices. So if you have a chat inside your, on your desktop computer, it gets saved and it'll show up in your phone or your web browser. So it's all automatic. As far as disappearing, I don't think they disappear automatically. As far as dealing with multiple teams and channels, to my knowledge, there's no way to merge a team. That I don't think is possible. You'll probably need to either set up new and do some manual moving, or pick winners among what you have and copy over the most critical content. Let's see. Difference between Teams and Yammer. Yammer is a much broader application. Teams is meant for sort of small groups of people. I mean, it can scale up to hundreds of people in a team, but it is, Teams is designed to be a more flexible application that brings in content from different places and provides a more sort of intimate collaboration experience between people. Yammer is much more like Facebook for corporations, where people can post happenings and get chat and have interactions through Yammer. They seem very similar, honestly, but Teams generally has more functionality. It has same threaded conversations as Yammer, but Yammer is really designed probably for larger organizations or larger groups of people. And it's very much sort of like the Facebook for business. I know Facebook has its own system too for that, but yeah, that's what Yammer is. Whereas Teams is really designed for small groups of people and to allow those small groups to collaborate in a few different ways and pull in different resources and applications. Yeah, let's see. Next up, will you cover later how to set up teams, giving access to members of an organization? Yes, I will get into that. I'll talk to you a little bit about, I'll show you about the group associated with the team a little bit later. And then comparing Teams to Slack, interesting question. Slack predated Teams, and Teams is very much, I think, a response to Slack, Microsoft response to Slack. They have similar functionality. Slack may have a broader set of existing integrations with other services, just simply due to its age and its sort of early, that it was the first to market. But for the most part, I think they both work and do much the same things. Teams is interesting compared to Slack to the extent that it's highly integrated with Office 365 and brings in sort of a lot of that Office 365 functionality. Teams also allows threaded conversations, so replies to posts within the group, which I believe Slack has not had. And beyond that, a lot of it is personal preference, honestly, about what you want to have. But Teams is, I think, a little more expansive in what it's trying to achieve, particularly in terms of bringing in a variety of content and tools into one place as it compared to Slack. Okay, so I'm going to move on here into the demo. And let me stop my sharing and pull up Teams. So I'll talk about, and just to follow Ben Meredith, I'll be following up later to talk about the external users. So we'll get into that. So this is the Teams interface for the user application. And pretty much anyone, if you have the default licensing for Office 365, can launch the Teams application. It is, it's interesting because Teams is both very easy to get into, which, as I think one questioner asked, mentioned or alluded to, is also dangerous because you can have everyone jump into teams and very quickly end up with a mess of teams and things that are happening. By default, anyone can create a team. Within this interface, you have a couple things. You have the ability to search up for users and for content. At the top right is the user icon where people can set statuses, including their presence and availability. Again, this is important because, you know, if users and your folks are using Skype Consumer for chat, they have no way to mark do not disturb when they go away for vacation without blocking everyone. So I can mark do not disturb within Teams if I go on vacation without, say, blocking out my mother, who I might want to be able to contact me. So that's important to note. There's other settings here. Some of the settings allow you to govern things like notifications, privacy, devices. This is important. You'll see, for example, that my device is set to my microphone. So sometimes if you have external mics, you need to pay attention to those settings. OneonOne Chat is where you have conversations with people. And sometimes you need to be able to pin. So if I'm having a chat with, you know, myself, because I'm logged in with a demo account, let's see, contacts. I want to be able to add someone to this. So I might want to add favorites to this group. So there you go. There's favorites. So I can actually add in people I want to talk to. One thing you should just be aware of is that Teams is designed to scale up and down, include being available to large organizations. That means generally there isn't one list of everyone in your organization that you go to. You have to search and sort of construct your list of contacts and favorites as you want to be available to you. Because in a large corporation, there could be thousands of people. Within the chat, this window, there's various buttons here, like we have the video and the calling and then the screen sharing where you can select, you know, which screen or application that window you want to share. You can also expand these. So you see this thing up here, this little icon with that I hover over, and it says add people. If I'm having a chat with one person, I can click add people and add others to my conversation, pull them in, which is really great when you're remote and you want to add someone else and sort of like as if you were sitting in the hall having a conversation and physically pulled someone from their office into your conversation. So that's really helpful. Down here is some of the other useful things that you can format your conversation, add attachments. The emoji are cute, and add meetings. One thing to note, a couple of things, if you add attachments, those attachments are going to get stored in your OneDrive for Business with permissions that allow the other person you're chatting with to access those files. So in OneonOne Chat, in this area, all attachments that you drop in will show up in OneDrive for Business. So that's important to know about where they would go. Let's see, meetings, you can schedule a meeting, you know, between two people. So just as in Outlook, where you can create meetings, Teams, there's something called a Teams meeting, which is very much sort of like an Outlook meeting and synchronizes with your Outlook calendar. You can create those meetings here. Okay, moving on. So this is Teams. Let's go now in the Teams section. This is where you can see the team itself. So when you click on this, there's actually no content under the team itself. You have to go into these channels. How you organize the channel, let's see. I think that you want to have channels that are, first of all, obvious to team members as to what they are and why they would post on one channel versus another. I can't tell you what that looks like, but but I think you need to think about what sort of is plainly obvious to people that are on your team as to what they are. The other thing is to have channels so that you can favorite the ones that are most important, because you can follow this. Following channels make sure that you get notifications when there's a post to the channel. You don't want to get a notification for every channel in every team that you might be a member of. Some of them are more important than others. So making sure that, for example, if, like we do IT services or other types of technology services, and there might be emergencies that come up with clients. And so we have an emergencies channel that is where we follow it to make sure that when there's conversations there, people can follow it, they get notified, it's sort of clear what's in that section. And it's aligned with our business and terminology that we use in our business. Now here, there's various settings. You can manage the team, and this is where you could add team members. You can see here that right now I'm logged in as 365 demo. So I'm the owner and I can add members or remove people. And then down here is members and guests. And so those are the different permissions level for the team. At this time, you cannot have separate permissions for the channel. So you can't have a channel that is restricted to a subset of people. You can also have requests from people, like they could be requesting to join your team. So if you have a private team that others want to get into, that's a useful thing to do. You can list the channels and people can set settings. And every team gets this general channel. That's the default. Settings, there's a variety of things that I encourage you to use pictures. There's a variety of settings around permissions. The permissions are generally fairly liberal, the default permissions, and allow team members to do everything. So it's up to you to restrict access. Guest permissions allow them to do what guests can do. And guests is a terminology for external users. Volunteers, people outside your organization are guests themselves, are guests. Let's see. Team code, this is really for a larger organization, I would say. This is what you could generate a code that allows other people in your organization to join the team. And then apps. These are the various apps that are present within your team or associated with the team, like Planner, OneNote, etc. And I'll show you here in a moment how those come into play. So on the tabs in general, so for example, this is the Department of Mysteries. And one of the things I want to do is I want to be able to organize our notes for our meetings, our meeting minutes. There's a couple options. I could come into the file section and create, say, a Word documents for every meeting and folders in the files. I could use what's called the wiki. I don't really use the wiki very much. It's really only available through Teams. Frankly, my preference personally is to use OneNote notebooks instead of the wiki. They pretty much does the same thing, but I'm going to create a OneNote notebook. And I'm going to put in the Department of, because there's a SharePoint group, I can actually open up the existing Department of Mysteries notebook. I could also create a section called Meeting Minutes, or just Meeting Notes, let's call it that. And I'm going to save. Let's creating a section in the OneNote. Okay, and I'm going to save that. So now what I have is I'm going to have a OneNote notebook that is, and I have a section for meeting notes. And now every time there's a meeting, through this interface, we can take notes for those meetings. That's really useful for, you know, OneNote is great. It's very rich in terms of the content. It can organize, you can templatize pages within the notebooks, and it can, it allows for fairly free form entering of content. It is also, OneNote is good, especially when integrated with Office 365 like this, so that it syncs across different devices. So that's where the wiki is not as good as say a OneNote, because the wiki is hard to access from other devices and other applications. Whereas there's a full-fledged OneNote client for, you know, iOS, iPhones, and iPads, and Windows, and Mac, and Android, etc. So just along with Teams. So using OneNote is a really good way to allow for free form and sort of entry in the content in Teams. And so you see that we've got the beginning of a team here with notes, and you can see that it posted an update to this with the information. Now, for example, if I had, and I don't have one here, but for instance, my team had a Power BI project that we tracked KPIs and metrics and, you know, for that would be great. We could put that right within, we could click here to embed a Power BI tab. Maybe, for example, one of the things that we care about is making sure that our team understood the services that our organization provides. So maybe I want to take our tech services page so that I make sure that my staff is aware of the content, and I'm just going to click website, and I'm going to embed the URL, and then I'm going to save. And now I have another tab that pulls in the website that's relevant maybe to the project or the team so that they're able to see it. So this is a way that I can use these tabs to aggregate content relevant to my team as part of this. And that's, yeah. Let's see, I'm just gonna stop for a moment and check questions. How are you defining outside org? Is this by email? Generally, people, when I say refer to external users, what I'm referring to is users that don't have accounts in our Office 365 tenant. So those are, I mean, it's email extension is a good indicator generally for that, but they're not with it. They just don't have an account in Office 365. They might be in a different Office 365 tenant at their own work or business, or they might not be in Office 365 at all. But that's generally what it means when you talk about external or guests. Guests are people that do not have Office 365 accounts that are listed in the admin panel of your Office 365 instance. And I use instance and tenant sort of interchangeably here. Different people have different terminology. Those are fairly technical ways to refer to it. Okay, so I'm gonna give an example of using an external user. So I'm going to join or create a team here. And one thing to do is I could just say, okay, I'm gonna say create a team. Now, remember when I said that a team or Office 365 is related to a group? If you have an existing group in Office 365 that you want to associate with a new team so that you can have all the functionality of Teams for that group, you can do the create from. And you can select a group from Office 365 for which you want a team created and associated. the other option here is I'm going to do is I'm going to build a team from scratch. And I'm going to, in this case, I'm not going to make a public group, which is fine, you could do. I'm going to make a private team. And I'm going to call this, let's call this the prophecy work group. They'll forgive me, but we've been reading Harry Potter at home, so I'm using Department of Mysteries prophecy work group as my example. So I'm going to skip this right now, and I'll get back to adding people to my team. So what I want to do for this work group is we're working on a project on prophecies, and I probably am going to create my OneNote Notebook. I'm actually going to, let's create that. And let's see, the prophecy work group. Let's add that work group there. Let's see. I might want to, now here's the file section, and I'm going to create a new spreadsheet. Let's call this key stakeholders. Let's see. I might create a spreadsheet with name, role. We might have, say, Dumbledore. He's an ally. Voldemort, enemy. And we'll go on there. So now, so you can actually see that I am within Teams able to launch create a spreadsheet with the Excel online interface and edit that content. I like to use tables within Excel here. And now I've got a spreadsheet that I can track information on and data related to that project. And this way it saves automatically. If others are in this, I can have collaborative editing on that content through the web interface, and I get all of the features of Office 365 in this one nice interface. I can start a conversation about this within Teams to talk about the spreadsheet, etc. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to click the close button up here, and you see that I have my spreadsheet. And just as anything, this is a simplistic example. You might create folders and other ways to organize your content. You can also add content. So if you've got a Dropbox that your team uses, you don't just have to store things in SharePoint. You could actually add, say, a Dropbox folder to this. Let's see. And okay. Now the other thing I might want to do is add a project plan. So one of the things we need to do is track tasks about our processes. So I'm going to add Planner, which is very much like Trello, if you're familiar with Trello. And let's see. So I'm going to create a new plan. And so this allows me to then, for my team within team, for my team to create essentially a Kanban style project plan for the team. And so I can add buckets like to do, on hold, let's see, failed, thwarted by Death Eaters. And then, victory. And so I can have different buckets, and I can create tasks like, let's see, gather prophecy. And so again, this is very much like a Trello style Kanban project management tool. And it's nice because this is all contained within your team, and the functionality is all here without any other accounts or administrative access. When users log in, it's all here. You could go in here and search and find other applications. So you can see there's many different applications within this, and say we do already use Trello and everyone likes Trello. No one wants to give up Trello and you want to include it. You can click this and add a Trello panel or Trello page to your team. And so that is an example of how you can bring together the variety of many different resources on the internet, many of which already integrate here, and centralize all of that into one interface as part of your team. So that when a new person joins the team, for example, all they have to log in is log into team, spend 5 minutes poking around or being shown through an onboarding session with someone where they need to get to. And so you have, while we are not necessarily all going to get away with using a variety of tools, Teams allows you to bring them together in one place. And that's, can be very useful. You could also embed a page. So maybe I want, for example, a tab that is just my stakeholders in here. So that now I've got the stakeholders I want to elevate that document, not just from being a file and a list of files, but to something that is critical to be maintained and managed and worked on as part of my project. So now the stakeholders list is elevated. And I can click edit here in the edit tab, edit to edit it. Yes. Okay, so one thing that you're all asking about is inviting guests. And what I'm going to do is I've got my browser right here. So you'll have to forgive me. Let's see. On the left side of my screen is an external user. So this is an Office 365 user in an external tenant. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to, in my internal one on the right side, I'm going to add a member. Let's see, what is your email address, Jack? Okay, now I need to remember what his email address is. Excuse me a second. Okay, Jack and parent W. Okay, so I'm going to add a member. And I'm going to do Jack at npower.nw.onmicrosoft. And it's going to say, okay, add Jack at npower.nw.onmicrosoft.com. And I'm going to click that. Now, one thing that's important right here to understand while you're doing things is to say, I don't want Jack to just show up as Jack guest. Jack, I want Jack to have a name, a real name. And so I'm going to click the pencil here, and I'm going to give him Jack's name, which is Jack Block. And so now you've got the name, because it just pulled that name, what was there from the email address. And those sometimes, especially with personal email accounts, can be gobbledygook, that no one else is going to recognize. So it's very important to edit that from right there when you're adding guests. It's much harder to go back and change that later on. So, and I'm going to click add. And it is sending an email to Jack. And we're watching on the left, and yep. So Jack has gotten this message that you can see on the left that Jack has been added as a guest to 501 Commons. So now I'm in Teams. And this is on the left is, and I'm going to minimize this screen to show Jack. And see, right now, Jack, we are in the web browser. So you're seeing me logged in through teams.microsoft.com through a web browser, and I am looking at Jack's user interface. I'm just going to refresh here, and it should update. I might need to, let's do this. Maybe reopen it. Well, I expect it did not show up. No. Okay, let's log out. Pardon me while I just getting the password here for Jack. Now, when someone logs into the web browser, this is good to see. They get two options. They say download the Teams desktop app and stay better connected. So it's the web browser saying you should really run the desktop, but I'm going to use the web browser web app instead. I'm going to click here. And no. Well, of course, there's always a little bit of an issue. It is a computer after all. Let's take a moment, and is there any questions? Let's see. Jack has an on Microsoft. What if it was Comcast.net? So if it was you were inviting someone from a Comcast account, they would have to, it depends on whether they have a Microsoft account or not, but associated with that email address, but that would work just fine. They would probably have to set up a password associated with the Comcast.net email address with Microsoft, and then they would be good to go. In the past, it's been a little bit trickier for people joining externally with like Comcast addresses. It has gotten a lot smoother, and since then, 501 Commons, we've operated a number of programs using external volunteers, logging into Teams, and with few exceptions, I think it's gone fairly well. In the past, we've had some hesitancy to do that. So I do think it's there, and you can invite someone with an external address. In terms of bulk adding guests, there is no, to my knowledge, there's no user interface to bulk add guests. It is possible with anything with Office 365, if you have someone that is technically savvy, they could use what's called PowerShell. They would likely be able to use PowerShell to add guests in bulk to groups. So if you had a couple hundred, they could write a script that adds that. But again, that requires some technical savvy to write a script and do basically command line, use the command line tools that allow you to add groups, add people to systems. let's see, are you saying a volunteer has to have a Microsoft account or account? Yes, so it does need some kind of account in the Office 365 database associated with that person, with that email, with that address. That is generally required to be created. Let's see if it shows up. Maybe I have to, in just a second, I might need to accept it. Oh yeah, so I needed to click that link. That's what I was waiting for. So I clicked the link and I'm going to accept that I am going to log into the 5.1 Commons as Jack. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use web app instead. Aha. So what happens here is that Jack's account normally resides in this Empower Northwest up here. So you see how this little menu or up here that lists company names popped up. So Jack is normally in Empower Northwest. But if you click on this menu, you see that there's also a 5.1 Commons company in which Jack is a guest. And so now me and this logged into this browser can see, I can switch back and forth between my company and my guest account within 5.1 Commons. And so as a guest, I can now see the conversation and say, you know, hello, Ram. And if I'm in my team, there'll be that conversation. And I can say, hi, Jack, from my account. And you see how it fairly quickly syncs back and forth in the thread. Jack can also access and view the files, look at the notebook, see the prophecy distribution plan from Planner, and look at the stakeholder spreadsheet. Now, if this had an account, like it was a Dropbox, if we added something like Dropbox or Trello or other tool as a plan, Jack would get presented with a login and need to be able to log into that. Because by virtual just logging into Teams, Jack is only accessing resources that are built in to the Microsoft platform. He would also have to have access to the other third-party services if we included those as pieces tied into the team. So that is important to know as part of this process. But Jack can come in here and edit. And I can say, you know, fudge. And you know, frenemy. So that is the ability, and so that's how Jack, as an external user, as a guest in Teams, can then be able to collaborate with the team. And yeah. So this is where I'm going to drop back and let's see. Go into Teams. I want to touch on one other piece here in terms of the groups and what you saw within Teams. So one of the things that you'll see about is a couple cases where it mentions SharePoint. And so see this open in SharePoint? That is going to take you to the SharePoint library associated with that. If I clicked on that, Actually, my browsers are not quite set up right so that I can just click on that because I'm logged into another account. But it would take me into the SharePoint site in the group in which that's created. I'm going to actually, let's see, General Prophecy, do I have? Well, let me open another. Guest window. Who am I logged in? Oh, this is Jack Block. Let's see. Let's create a team actually within. Jack's going to create a team here to show you what that looks like. Let's see. Teams, manage teams. Oh, I have to switch. I need to switch to my own tenant. And I'm going to create a team. Building a team from scratch, call it private. Let's see. Demo. I'm going to skip this. So if I go in here and I click, it's setting it up, to be patient. So in terms of bulk groups, I believe that links cannot be used for guests. You can't simply distribute to guests or external users a link to your team and have them join it. They do need to be invited by email address specifically, because when you click that and actually put in their email address, it is actually creating something called a guest account within Azure Active Directory. So, and as far as can we use Azure Active Directory to add these non-MS users, I believe so. I would have to follow up with you on the specific steps. I don't want to misspeak. I think you might be able to create the guests within the Azure Active Directory portal and then add them to the team. So there's a few different ways that this could be done. Most likely it might probably best if there's a Teams PowerShell command to do so. That's probably the best way, would be my guess. Okay, so now I'm going to go here and let me open this team in SharePoint. So what we've seen here is the private group. And this is the group or SharePoint Out 365 group that is associated with that webinar internal team that I just created. And you can see that within the documents library, it's created a folder for each team that you, or each channel, so that when you store files within this, you know, if I create a new file, let's say, I'll create a new file here, just to give an example. Give it a name. And now I'm going to go back. There's my test document I just created. And within this, if I refresh it, there's that test document I just created over there. That also means that you as a user can use Sync and use the OneDrive for Business client to sync this document library to your computer. So then you can access through Windows Explorer or the Mac Finder all those files associated with the team. Yeah. Let's see. Let me just take stock of where I stand. Okay, so we talked about creating teams. I've shown you, for example, an example of creating a team that invites an external user. We've created various content. Let's see. I'm going to go into my account, and I just want to show you one thing about meetings. So in the Department of Administration's meeting, say we have a weekly meeting. One of the things you can do is schedule, if I go over to meetings, I'm going to schedule a meeting and say check-in meeting. And I can then invite people. I can also add this to the channel. So I might want to add this to the general channel. The benefit of doing that and why that's relevant here is that when that meeting's in the channel, anyone that can see the channel can then join the meeting. And I believe add it to their calendar too. So that is a useful way if you could have, say, a weekly staff meeting that then people can subscribe to that meeting that's created within the channel. So we'll schedule. And there is the meeting. And they can click on it to join. So, okay. So that is, I think, generally my overview of the meetings and teams. One option is also the phone system. If you do have the phone system installed, more options show up here. Now, lastly, I'm going to get into the administrative interface for this. Let's see. I got logged out. I encourage you that if you don't use multi-factor authentication as an administrator, please use it. So this is the Teams administrative interface. There usually is not a lot to do within the administrative interface. It is useful that you can view all of the teams that exist in your organization. So for those of you that have used Teams and have ended up with a mess, using this can list all of the teams that exist so that you can then go through them, look at them, straighten them out. You can archive them and do a variety of things from this administrative panel, even if you're not an administrator or owner of the group, because you're a global administrator in your Office 365 tenant. The other settings, if you do have the phone system, you can configure all of the phone system settings through here, direct routing, call queues, auto attendance, all of those lovely things. And then lastly is one of the settings that is not on by default. So if you go into Teams and try to add in an external user by their email address, it's not going to like it. It's going to tell you, I don't know who that person is. You have to manually go in here to the admin and click to turn on allow guest access. And in my experience, it takes about 24 hours for that to become enabled. Once that is done, then you can add guest users by email in Teams. So that's pretty critical to do. There is other settings in here. I'm not going to go through them as that would be tedious. You can analytics and reporting. So this is again the nice thing about 365 and Office Microsoft is they have nice reports that you can see about who's using it, who is it opened, use the applications. Also, let's see. There are some controls, and I have to look at where they are, about what apps people can install. Sometimes only the default apps will show up to be installed, but if you want external third-party apps, you have to turn on that access. Let's see. And that's as much as I'm going to get into the admin portal, but that's, unless you have specific questions that you can ask now, please go ahead. Yeah, anyways, I'm going to turn here see if there's any questions that I can answer. Let's see. Office 365 group. So a couple ways to see groups that are created. One is through the SharePoint admin. So it depends on whether you're the user at a user level or an administrator. If you're an administrator trying to find everything that is created, use the admin panels to manage those and see those, because they give you the aggregate view of it. Otherwise, searching is your best bet. So coming in here let me do that as Jack. If Jack goes to SharePoint, Jack will either see it because it's a frequent site for him, or Jack can search for groups that might exist. SharePoint only, 365 generally only presents to administrators comprehensive lists of sites and groups and teams and things. And again, that's because of, this system's really designed to scale up into, very large corporations that can have thousands of these things. Can we use Azure Active Directory to add these on MS users? So you can add the guests there. Also, if the name of the teams is of the guests is problematic, you can use the Azure Active Directory tools to rename guests and give them a proper name. Do we provide consulting services for setting up teams? That's certainly something we could consider, and I would suggest if you, let me show you. For those of you that are interested in support or would like help, go to 5onecommons.org, and then under, let's see, is it services? It's the request for assistance form right here that you can see. That is where you can request support, and we'll reach out and figure out how we might be able to help you. So that can happen through that administrative panel. So that's if an administrator of the group leaves the organization, can someone else on the team take over? So a team member cannot take over a team with that, because they don't have permissions to do so. But what can happen is an administrator, Windows Office 365 administrator, can come in here and say, go into the Department of Mysteries. And as an administrator, I could come in here and change a member to an owner. So that would be the proper method, is to have an Office 365 administrator go in and use the administrative access to modify permissions to the group, group and team. Them being groups and teams being synchronized. Okay. Teams design, let's go back. So I'm almost done here. I'm just going to go back to my PowerPoint. Now with design, it's a fairly simple approach to this. Generally, I would advise organizations to use, there are two different sort of types of teams that most organizations will use. One is a departmental level team. So this is, you know, different programs, or generally all your programs might have a team. Development, communications, leadership team, groups, things like that. So departmental teams where you can have conversations and communications, have tabs and files that are all relevant to the long-term ongoing management of the team. That's the first thing to do, is create those. Then in terms of project, I think that there is what we would call project teams, or working group teams. So this would be cross-departmental, cross-functional teams that are created for initiatives that are time-bound. And those projects those teams would be created and then broken down when the project's done. Likely, you're going to want to develop some kind of process around that, so that when you archive or even delete that team, you take files and relevant materials generated by that team and save them somewhere that is easier to access, maybe within your general file store for the organization. That would be my general advice on that. As far as teams creation, by default, Office 365 lets anyone create a team. Yes, that is pretty much, can be ridiculous and can lead to lots of confusion and frustration. This is why it's important when you're jumping into teams to have some really good communication, and generally tell people, don't create teams. I advise you in your organization to have someone that is sort of the traffic cop or the leader for Teams implementation, and advise staff that if they want to create a team, talk to the person to get that team for permission, or just get their counsel before they create a team. That way, and this would be good if this person is also a technical resource or champion for teams in your organization. That way, if they know something exists already, they can suggest that person join that team. But the first step in this is probably to just develop a shared understanding in your organization about team creation. There are technical methods that you can implement, so controls that you can implement to prevent other people from creating teams, and sort of make it so that only a subset of users can create teams. That requires more advanced functionality. It requires an Azure Active Directory premium subscription that's available for free through the Microsoft's EMS license for nonprofits up to 50 users. And it requires some PowerShell and advanced configuration to put in place. So you'll just have to, and Microsoft has documentation online about restricting team creation. I would say that if you can, it is a lot easier and sort of more technically easier to do so using sort of human methods, and just creating that shared understanding and communicating with groups in your organization around the best practice and how they should go about creating those teams. Otherwise, yeah, you can go put in place technical restrictions. The real challenge around the technical restrictions is that as you're using the application for doing projects and using it with external parties, that group of people that might be legitimately creating teams is going to expand. And thus you're going to have now hurdles in place to grant those persons access to create teams. And you could end up with a situation where effectively everyone is granted access to create teams. And thus you may have, I think, leaning on process and shared understanding is the most important and best way to manage that. Can you say that again? About the technical restrictions? Yes. So it requires licensing for Azure Active Directory Premium to put in place restrictions for team creation. And then there are PowerShell commands that have to be put in to actually do it. It's not available through the web user interface to restrict access to create teams. Yeah, I'm searching to see if I can pull up. So right here is the document about creating the restrictions. So this is a technical document. It is not for the faint of heart. I'm going to paste this. Is there, let's see, type answer, let's see. Where can I post within this? Is there a chat? Well, I'm just going to answer on Andrea's question here. I'm going to post the link. To creating teams, restricting creation of teams. And yes, guests cannot schedule teams, your team meeting, you're correct. That is one limitation that's a bit unfortunate. So that is, with teams design, departmental teams and project-oriented teams are the two ways to go. Generally, only I would have managers or have care with how you organize and create departmental teams, and then have a shared understanding about project teams and the process, the business process around managing that. Yes, so this must be enabled, as we talked about, it must be enabled by administrator. It's an effective method for external communication, but guests have limited access. There are certain resources and things that guests cannot do, and there are various technical reasons as to why guests cannot do those things. But for the most part, for I would say 90% of situations is just fine. It's not an issue to have the restrictions, and it can be a very effective tool for external collaboration with volunteers and other partners. One other piece that's interesting, I'm not getting too in depth here, but the Teams has a built-in phone system that you can use, or formerly known as Cloud PBX. This can effectively replace your phone system if you're using, whether you have an on-premise digital PBX or a cloud PBX or hosted like a Ring Central type thing. It allows you to make plain, plain old telephone system calls from your Windows, Mac, and mobile devices. So you can make a call from your phone for your, say, your personal cell phone from your work phone number. That's really useful. It also, this is where presence comes into play. If you're using the phone system, going to do not disturb on Teams on, say, your phone will keep it from ringing. So that's really helpful. And, it needs to be managed. You can purchase Teams compatible phones that basically you can sign into Office 365 right on and then make phone calls if you want that handset on your desk. You can port your numbers to Teams, and it also has standard PBX features like voicemail, phone trees, and queues. And you can have conference numbers for which you purchase minutes. Generally, there is, with Office 365, licensing, with this, and I'm going to talk about this because it's really the phone system. Teams is included with the small business or E1 or the enterprise E1 licenses that most nonprofits are using, and then anything higher whether you're on E3 licensing or even E5. It's all Teams is generally included. There really isn't anything you need to do to turn on Teams. As long as all your users are licensed within the admin control panel for Teams, they will have it and can log into it. The phone system does require other licensing. There are generally two requirements. You need a license for Microsoft phone system, and you need a calling plan. So the phone system gets you access to the actual software that runs the phones, and then the calling plan gives you access to having a phone number and the minutes and all of the other things. You can get the phone system included with the sort of all-inclusive E5 license, and then the calling plans I think are right now at $12.50 a month per user. So it's not free, and it's not the cheapest solution, but it can be cheaper and a better solution than some of the other hosted voice over IP solutions out there. And it's very nice because the interface is generally clean in my experience to manage it, to administer it. And when you turn it turns on and shows right inside the Teams client. There's no other agent or software to deploy to use the phone system unless you want to get some Teams phones themselves. So it's a good functionality. One thing about using this, as with the phone system, as with any other voice over IP phone system and on mobile devices, if you have poor cellular coverage, it's not going to work very well. But generally, in my experience, it works it's a good system and relatively reliable. Yeah. Okay. So I have reached sort of generally the end of my presentation. It's 1:29, so we're about on time. Are there any other questions that I can answer? I think we've been answering them as we go along. So great. Well, let me go back, double check. Well, thank you very much for attending this webinar. As I said, if you do want to get some support or need support from 501 Commons, you can go to our website, 501commons.org, and submit the request for assistance form to get support. Thank you very much. Also, actually, one thing I want to mention is that Microsoft has, support and training materials on their website. That's a good place to go. But in my experience, using Teams is less about the sort of the technical things and of the using the tool, and often about the process and norms. So here's the end user training website for our teams that you can share with your users. But otherwise, a lot of what's about is working together and establishing norms about what groups do we want, what teams do we want, what kind of channels make sense, how are we as a group going to work together in this new platform. So thank you very much. And if there's not any more questions, there's one more question, I'm going to end. And everyone, have a good day.